Welcome back to the Tambellini Group's weekly update on what's happening in higher ed and COVID-19. I'm Katelyn Ilkani, and I'm joined by Raechelle Clemmons.
Hi, everybody.
And we're here this week to talk about student success and the future of higher ed. There have been many changes. I know people are talking about on social media that's felt like we've all been home for months now, even though for some people it's only been a few weeks and for others maybe a bit longer. But a lot of changes are happening and there's really a new normal and new routines being set up. So one of the big themes that we've noticed is people feel like they've settled into this new normal a little bit more than they had the week before. People are starting to look to the future, what's going to happen in the mid to late term, looking even to the fall semester. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today, as well as some challenges we're seeing with remote work, how attitudes are shifting about what student success might mean, and what is the responsibility of the institution. And within that topic, also this idea of accessibility and keeping accessibility at the forefront as all of these institutions are doing remote learning. So we have a PowerPoint again for you today that we're going to go through with some of these high-level topics. And the first one is the remote work challenges. So I'm sure you've seen in the news, there's been a lot of talk about Zoom bombing and privacy problems with Zoom and potentially security problems with the 0-day reported. Here, NPR has put out on Twitter that now even the FBI is warning about Zoom privacy problems and that a lot of Zoom meetings are getting hijacked. We've seen this happening in higher ed. Just something to think about and to be aware of as your own institutions are potentially using Zoom.
And many institutions now have put out guidelines or recommended best practices to help their faculty and students avoid this as much as possible. But it's an unintended consequence, right? The whole world has turned to Zoom and to other web conferencing tools, and so the bad guys or gals that are out there are going to try to take advantage of that too. So it's one of those things that we have to just be a little bit fluid and agile about, I guess, in terms of responding.
Yeah, that's a great point. We're starting to see attitudes shift generally about what does it mean to serve students in a remote environment. How does that change how you're teaching? How does it change how students are learning? And these aren't normal times. All of these classes that were meant to be in person are now being shifted online. Every student might not have the same level of access to an internet connection or might be called to helping, as a nurse or as an EMT. This great Twitter thread goes through some of the situations that this one professor has been seeing among her own students. And really, it runs the gamut of all kinds of stories. Some students' parents have even died now of COVID-19. And this professor is trying to ask, that everyone be more cognizant of the fact that these are just really not normal times and students are suffering too.
Yeah, I think, so we've been talking about this for a while and about, concerns over student success. I know early on we talked about some of the fundraising activities that were helping around helping students who maybe didn't have a place to live because the dorms had closed or maybe didn't have enough food. I think, this continues, right? So I think what this has done is really emphasized for folks who maybe, sort of heard that these things existed, that our student populations were dealing with these experiences. It's maybe brought it more to the surface. And then, of course, now we have extenuating circumstances, right? So it's not just the normal challenges that students were already facing that were already tough, but things like potentially losing a parent or being ill, or also caring for a child who maybe was in childcare before while they were going to school, has just added to the stressors. So It's I think faculty teach because they love their disciplines and they love their students, right? They want to care for they want to impart knowledge on their students, and they genuinely care for them. And so I think, it's good to see this. I'm not surprised by it at all, in terms of the empathy that we're now seeing. But I think for lots of people, it has really created an awareness and empathy that's super important. We all just have to be a little bit kinder to each other, right? A little bit more forgiving. Everybody is in a stressful place right now.
Yeah, these are really extraordinary times. And some things I think get lost as this big push and rush to going online happened that are now starting to surface. And another one of those topics is accessibility.
Right. Accessibility is a big topic and has been a big topic in higher education for a long time, again, because we care about our students and we want to make sure that education is universally accessible. But technology has not always kept up to those requirements. And this, of course, is highlighting that in an extreme way, because everything is being delivered through technology. Before, if you had a student who required maybe more time on a test, or who maybe needed somebody to, I have a child who used to get the test read to them. Well, that's really hard to do now because everything is being tested through a learning management system in an online environment. So I think both in terms of the accessibility concerns around captioning, around the tools that you're using, are coming to surface, but there's a deeper conversation that's happening, which is, how do we assess student learning? And are these online time tests and quizzes really the best way to do that? Or are there other ways that we can engage students in learning and assess learning in a maybe more meaningful and deep way? So I think that's a great conversation that's happening as well, at the same time that we're very concerned about everybody having access to the information they need through the online tools because of accessibility.
Yeah, and it's a call to our vendor community to really be thinking about making sure their own tools are accessible.
So we had this conversation the other day with somebody, but that notion of accessibility baked in from the start, sort of universal design versus creating an alternate and maybe not exactly equal experience, is really important. And so, yes, this is absolutely a call to the community who are providing ed tech tools to make sure that you're really thinking about the design and access of your system so that every student has the opportunity to take advantage of them.
So this brings us to the last topic we want to discuss today, which is looking to the future. And there is a lot of discussion about what the future is going to look like. People are, really unsure. It feels like things are changing every day. We did an open office hours this week with a great panel of higher ed CIOs who touched on some of these things. So we wanted to bring a few thoughts to the forefront here that seem to be the most relevant. One is that we're watching school closures to see what's happening with the financial viability of institutions as we go through this situation. We see a need. Oh, go ahead, Ray.
No, I was going to say, even before closures, there have been a couple of announcements. We talked about one last week, but even before that, there is a shared Google document that's circulating right now around hiring freezes. So, which institutions are either pausing temporarily or freezing hiring. There's about 150 institutions on that list, at least as of last kind of update. There are also institutions that are stopping the tenure clock or extending it for a year, which is a really interesting development. So, which is not related to closing at all or financial difficulties, but it's an acknowledgement that these are sort of unprecedented times in that case. But certainly there are steps that are being taken by institutions to either acknowledge the challenges of working in this environment or to mitigate some of the financial risks, like hiring freezes and potential future closures.
That's a very good point. There's some great resources that are becoming available now. I love how collaborative the higher education community is in sharing all this information.
Yeah, for sure.
So looking ahead to the summer and fall, we're starting to hear more discussions about this now as things settle down, as people get into a routine. And we're seeing a need to be really thinking about what will happen. How does an institution prepare for this, stay at home, lockdown situation to potentially be in place through the fall term?
So this is interesting. There's definitely a school of thought that says one foot in front of the other. So institutions are starting to think about spring or summer instead of in before fall. But there are also, at least anecdotally, some things I've heard that suggests that institutions are starting to look at these kind of futurist scenarios and what ifs. And what if we aren't back in school by fall, or we can't open residence halls or whatever, and starting to make some plans around them. I've heard of expedited projects, things that we're going to maybe start up in fall, but that would really help an institution be more successful in the fall if they did have to continue to teach out in an online fashion. So those projects are being expedited. So it's really interesting to kind of hear that we have now sort of, as we said earlier, we've sort of crossed that bridge of getting into this new normal, however long that lasts. People are settling in and now starting to look forward.
Well, that's all Ray and I have for you today. We'll be back at the end of next week with a new update. And if you have any questions for us, or you have content you'd like for us to share, please reach out directly to us at the Tambellini Group. We'd love to hear from you.
And so now we all have a little bit of a weekend to look forward to, right? Hopefully.
Yes.
A safe, socially or physically distanced, not socially distanced. I think that's the new terminology. Have a safe, physically distanced, but socially engaged weekend.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us today.